Welcome to the Daily Bite. I'm your host, Pastor Steve Andrews. Today we read from Leviticus chapter 17. And Yahweh spoke to Moses, saying, Speak to Aaron and his sons, and to all the people of Israel, and say to them, This is the thing that Yahweh has commanded. If any one of the house of Israel kills an ox, or a lamb, or a goat in the camp, or kills it outside the camp, and does not bring it to the entrance of the tent of meeting to offer it as a gift to Yahweh in front of the tabernacle of Yahweh, blood guilt shall be imputed to that man. He has shed blood, and that man shall be cut off from among his people. This is to the end that the people of Israel may bring their sacrifices that they sacrifice in the open field, that they may bring them to Yahweh, to the priest at the entrance of the tent of meeting, and sacrifice them as sacrifices of peace offerings to Yahweh. And the priest shall throw the blood on the altar of Yahweh at the entrance of the tent of meeting, and burn the fat for a pleasing aroma to Yahweh. So they shall no more sacrifice their sacrifices to goat demons, after whom they whore. This shall be a statute forever for them throughout their generations. And you shall say to them, Any one of the house of Israel, or of the strangers who sojourn among them, who offers a burnt offering or sacrifice, and does not bring it to the entrance of the tent of meeting to offer it to Yahweh, that man shall be cut off from his people. If any one of the house of Israel, or of the strangers who sojourn among them, eats any blood, I will set my face against that person who eats blood, and will cut him off from among his people. For the life of the flesh is in the blood, and I have given it for you on the altar, to make atonement for your souls. For it is the blood that makes atonement by the life. Therefore I have said to the people of Israel, No person among you shall eat blood, neither shall any stranger who sojourns among you eat blood. Anyone also of the people of Israel, or of the strangers who sojourn among them, who takes in hunting any beast or bird that may be eaten, shall pour out its blood and cover it with earth. For the life of every creature is its blood. Its blood is its life. Therefore I have said to the people of Israel, You shall not eat the blood of any creature, for the life of every creature is its blood. Whoever eats it shall be cut off. And every person who eats what dies of itself, or what is torn by beasts, whether he is a native or a sojourner, shall wash his clothes and bathe himself in water, and be unclean until the evening. Then he shall be clean. But if he does not wash them or bathe his flesh, he shall bear his iniquity. This is the word of the Lord. Today's text is a movement towards some of the Old Testament laws again. We had the Day of Atonement yesterday. We had the laws about uncleanliness before that. And here we have laws about the care of creation in this section. Tomorrow we'll start getting into what laws entail loving your neighbor. But for this one, as we look at the text, we have Moses hearing from Yahweh to speak to Aaron, to the rest of the priests, and then to all the people of Israel. So this is for all people. It is what Yahweh has commanded. And it starts with the killing of an animal. Ox, lamb, goat. It really doesn't make a difference what animal you're killing. If you kill it in the camp, if you kill it outside the camp, notice it doesn't make a difference again. If it is not offered as a gift to Yahweh, it is sin. Blood guilt shall be imputed to that man. That man is guilty for shedding blood. He's guilty for taking a life. Now, what's the purpose of this? You could make the case on the surface that what we're talking about here today is a simple lack of care for creation, that the Lord does not want that to happen. Don't simply kill an ox because you feel like killing an ox. This would get into poaching, right, as a connection to modern times. Or taking a BB gun out in your backyard and just shooting at a squirrel. That's not fully what this text is getting at. It's deeper than that, but there is a certain level of the care of creation that we do consider because God has made us to be his caretakers of this place. We are to care for it. We're to care for the animals. It's what we were made to do, if you look back to Genesis 1 and 2. This is much deeper though, as it's going to be rooted to pagan worship, as we'll see at the end of the first paragraph down in verse 7. So before we do that, though, before we look at the pagan practice, here we have, again, blood guilt. The man is guilty. He has shed blood. He shall be cut off from among his people. The fact that it is connected to pagan worship is why it gets the person cut off. You remove them from Israel so that they do not entice other Israelites away from Yahweh. They don't cause temptations to pagan worship. This is to the end, so this is the purpose, that the people of Israel may bring their sacrifices to the priest to offer it to Yahweh. The priest takes the blood, throws it against the altar, burns the fat. We've looked at these things before with the various types of sacrifice. So if you're going to sacrifice an animal, you're sacrificing the animal to Yahweh. You're not sacrificing the animal to anyone else or anything else. And notably here, goat demons are mentioned. That's an interesting phrase, right? In and of itself. What is a goat demon? We know demons exist. Demons are very much so real. They are fallen angels. So in that sense, to say goat demon is a strange thing because, well, goats weren't angels. So you don't actually have like these little demonic goats running around. Well, that's not to say that a demon couldn't possess a goat. But again, this is a reference to pagan worship. And so there are other views in this world. There are mythologies in this world about how things work. And to shed blood is fairly common in religious practices. So some of the pagan beliefs in the land around where the Israelites are going to live, they were to sacrifice animals to their pagan gods too. We have an example of that contest that Elijah has with the prophets of Baal. Is that 1 Kings, somewhere in the later teens, maybe 17, 18, 19, in that range, where he has that competition. They make an offering. They even start cutting themselves, trying to get their lord, Baal, to pay attention to them, and he doesn't. All right, so verse 7, goat demons after whom they whore. And this is another one of those examples where God speaks of our faith in him, or the lack of our faith in him, better said, as adultery, right? He takes the idea that he is the husband and we as his people are the bride. And so when we worship a false god or another god, when we break that first commandment, we are committing adultery against him. We are cheating on our one true spouse, husband. Here it is. They are committing adultery against God as they worship a pagan demon. Now, admittedly, there are some of those religions around them where part of the pagan worship is actually committing adultery, even in the sense we'd think of it, right? Temple prostitution being a big deal, but that's not what this is about here. This is a statute forever throughout their generations. Some of this is still true, right? Now, the offerings, we've talked about those not being the same anymore, but the idea that we would not make sacrifices to goat demons, that's First Commandment stuff right there. That stands for the rest of time. That one's not going to go away. There will never be a day where God tells you to sacrifice to a goat demon. So anyone of the house of Israel, or any stranger in their midst, who offers an offering or sacrifice not to Yahweh is cut off. Removed from Israel, they're thrown out. They're no longer a part of this people. All right, so as we continue with the text, then we get down to the second section. It shifts a little bit. So we've got the spilling of blood. Now we've got the eating of blood. Another one of God's Old Testament laws here for them to follow. You are not to eat any blood from the animal. And the reason for that's going to be because the life of the thing is in the blood. But before we get to that, God is going to set his face against the person who eats blood. That's not good. You don't want God to set his face against you, right? This is a way to talk about this chapter with the children. Do we want God to be against us? Or do we want him to be for us? We want him to be on our side, or do we want him to not be on our side? And then you can push that a little further. How do we know that God isn't against us? How do we know that God is for us? For that, I would encourage you to make use of Romans, the letter Paul writes to the church in Rome, Romans chapter 5, verse 8, Romans chapter 8, verse 31. Let me read you both of those verses. These are fantastic for a conversation around this. Chapter 5, verse 8, God shows his love for us, and that while we were still sinners, Christ died for us. And then 8:31, what then shall we say to these things? If God is for us, who can be against us? And go ahead and just keep reading that section of Romans 8, and those next several verses are fantastic. Probably all the way through verse 39 or so. Just read that whole section together and rejoice at the gift of faith that the Lord gives. All right, so again, the cutting off of people happens here if they have sinned in this way against God. Why is this a sin that gets somebody removed from God's people? Again, it's going to connect to pagan worship, the eating of blood in some of the pagan practices, the idea that you are somehow, by eating their blood, you are getting strengthened. You are being healed or made stronger, whatever it might be, by consuming that animal's life, or to use what was probably more of a pagan phrase even today, that animal's life force. And that's not a way as Christians that we would speak, but other belief systems will talk that way. You'll hear that. Now, we may not understand verse 11, but it is truth because God has said it. The life of the flesh is in the blood. So the life of the bull is in its blood. The life of the lamb is in its blood. We don't have to be able to fully understand just what that means. Just like as I talk to you today, as we talk about being men, I don't know what a soul is, right? What distinguishes my soul from my body? I don't know the answer to that question. But the Lord has said that I have a body and I have a soul. So I take him at his word. So I don't know what it exactly means that a bull's life is in its blood. But the Lord has said that it is. So I'm going to take him at his word, and I'm going to trust him on that, because it's beyond my capability of understanding, and that's okay. There are many things like that in our faith. So the Lord uses that blood to make atonement for our souls. Consider it this way, really, like one life for another. And in that sense, you can ask that question. Who gave his life for ours? So we're talking about the Old Testament, trading a life for one for another. Who traded his life for our life that we may live? There's your connection very clearly. Now, lastly, as we move to that final paragraph, if you are killing an animal for the sake of food, that's allowed, right? Genesis 9 gives that instruction when Noah gets off the ark that they can eat meat. They can eat animals. This is actually good. The Lord has blessed this thing. We've already seen the laws about which animals he can and can't eat earlier here in the book of Leviticus. But as the caretakers of creation, as stewards of creation, we are to care for these animals. And so we don't just slaughter them needlessly. We slaughter them, we kill them if we're going to eat them. That's okay. But even in doing so, we still want to show a care for that creature. And knowing that its life is in its blood, we're not going to eat that blood, and instead we're going to pour that blood out onto the ground, and we're going to cover it over with earth, with dirt. We're going to, in a sense, bury that animal, right? Even though we're eating part of the animal, we're going to bury what we don't eat. This is simply being, again, a good steward, one who manages God's creation well, that he has entrusted to us. So, is there anything more here to cover in the rest of this? We've been talking about how the life is in the blood. Whoever eats of it shall be cut off. Verse 15 does give us a little bit of a different thing. So whoever eats what dies or is torn by beasts. So not just, you hunted and killed it. That person is unclean until the evening. They have to wash their clothes, they have to bathe, and then they'll be clean again. So you can find a cow that has, for example, died. Maybe it was killed by another animal or something like that. You could eat of it, but it will make you unclean, though, for the rest of that day. However, if you kill the cow for the sake of eating, that does not make you unclean until the evening. Now, verse 16, a little different. If you don't wash and bathe as you are supposed to, he shall bear his iniquity. In other words, that person's sin remains upon him. And we know as Christians today that we don't want our sin to remain upon us. That would mean condemnation. It would mean death. And so we confess our sins regularly. We entrust ourselves to the Lord that he forgives. And so that's the call here. This is the process in the Old Testament sacrificial system. Right? If you've done this, follow the Lord's command and be clean again. So we rejoice that we don't have to think of these clean and unclean laws that would have taken up so much of their day and their thinking. Even that, conversation about which people can we interact with. Everything as you went throughout your day was probably at least colored by this conversation a little bit. So we have that covered for us by the blood of Christ. You are clean. Praise we Christ.